Hi there, everyone, and welcome to our program today. It's The Forum. My name is Jared Moyer. I'm going to be one of your hosts for the program today. My teammate Diane Dean will be here momentarily. She's going to be co-hosting the program with me. And the Forum concept is this. We do 4 of these a year. The first 3 are a question and answer variety. You bring the questions, and our team is going to provide plain English answers. Today, we're going to do lending compliance here in just a few moments. The second quarter is a deposit compliance Q&A. The third quarter is a anti-money laundering, AML, CFT Q&A. And then the fourth one that we do every year, just a little bit different. It's kind of like a checklist for the year, a priority list for the year to make sure you didn't miss something. And so we take a look back at the year that was, and then we take and give you a glimpse of what's up on the horizon to get you set as we flip the calendar year over. Now, we're going to do that because we just did that, and we don't want to go too fast here, but that's the 4 forums that we do each and every year. Today's agenda is simply answers to your lending compliance questions. Okay, the goal is to get to as many as we can in the hour that is ahead of us. Now, I can't promise that we'll get to every single one of them. We have a lot of you that just like all of our webinars, any of our programs for that matter, you're allowed to pre-submit questions. So we have several of those, but you're also going to be able to submit questions live during the program. Let me do this. Take a look at that Zoom control panel. Lots of different buttons there. It can be a little intimidating. Let me give you a couple different things. First off, if you have a question that you want to submit in connection with the program today, I need you to use the one that's labeled question and answer, Q&A. Okay? If you're looking for the materials, again, you can go to the resources tab. If for some reason you're having issues with audio, visual technology, your experience as a whole, we've got our team standing by behind the chat. Let them know. And if it's something we can take care of, we'll do our best to get those things addressed. If it's not something we can address, you may have to look into it on your side of the camera, if you will. All right, the session is being recorded. If you find that you need to go back and listen to something, because this is going to be a rapid fire, get to as many as we can during this program. I'm going to tell you more about how you can get your hands on that recording at the conclusion of our program here today. I also want to let you know that since it is a rapid fire and you may find yourself hungry for more as we go through the program today, there's an entire library of topics out there at our website where you can see a larger entree, if you will, on the menu. And hopefully that'll be something that satisfies that additional need for information. And if you're not sure what we're going to look for, reach out to us. We'd love to explore that conversation with you and talk more about that. All right, before we get started, you can see Dave Dickinson came in, my teammate here. He's the president of Bankers Compliance Consulting. He's actually got some exciting news he wants to share with all of you here today.
Well, thank you, Jared. I appreciate it. Doing a great job so far. And I know everybody wants to get back to that, but I have an exciting announcement to make, and this audience is going to be the first to hear it. Effective March 1st, Bankers Compliance Consulting will be joining Brady Martz. It's a top 100 nationally ranked accounting and advisory firm. Now, since 1993, Bankers Compliance Consulting has been turning complicated regs into plain English, as you all know, and we're going to continue to do that. But we're teaming up with Brady Martz, and that will strengthen our capabilities and expand the services with which we are able to serve you. Brady Martz serves financial institutions with numerous products. Here's a few. Jared, if you want to go to the next slide there for me. They do loan file reviews, financial statement audits, income tax preparation and planning, and internal audit assistance, as well, again, as you see here listed, many, many other services. We're excited. We're excited about our ability to continue to serve you with our expert advice and our personalized help, while also taking advantage of these extra services and expertise that Brady Martz provides. Now, if you're wondering, I'm not going anywhere. I, along with the rest of the very talented Bankers Compliance Consulting team, will continue to be here to serve you, but now in a stronger and more effective way. So with that, Jared, I know everybody's chomping at the bit to hear your answers and how many you can get in 1 hour, right? So I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thanks.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that exciting news. We are all excited about that, but we're also excited to do some lending compliance Q&A today. And there's my teammate, Diane Dean. She's going to co-host with me today. In fact, she's going to be moderating. I'm going to be trying to give the plain English answers. And when I can't give the answer, that means it was a really hard question. Diane's going to take those questions. Diane, the floor is yours.
Okay. How about we start with some HMDA? Can an institution voluntarily submit HMDA data? And this institution says they originate mortgages through third parties and meet all HMDA criteria, except they are not located in an MSA.
Well, that last piece, that they're not located in MSA, that's one of the criteria necessary to be a HMDA reporter. So I wouldn't voluntarily, unless I know I'm going to be going over the line, either from a volume standpoint or because I'm moving into an MSA, I wouldn't voluntarily go there unless like next year or the following year you're going to be doing that. And there's rules associated with that. So voluntarily, no, I'd steer clear.
Okay, we have a couple here related to an abundance of caution. If real estate collateral is taken solely out of an abundance of caution, is it still technically real estate so that all the regulations generally still apply, except it can provide an appraisal exemption? For example, could you have a HELOC where the only collateral is taken out of an abundance of caution?
Well, there's a lot of details in that question, and I've made note of a couple of them here. So when it comes to abundance of caution, that's really a safety and soundness thing. It's not so much what I'll call a regulatory compliance thing. So there's an appraisal thing that was referenced in the question. Yeah, there's some things you can get out of there, but from a compliance standpoint, like alphabet regs, HMDA, Reg Z, I think I heard in there, flood insurance. If you have it as an abundance of caution, you are secured, you have it, and it's going to have to play by the compliance rules.
And right along those lines, what's the risk of considering a loan unsecured when real estate is taken as an abundance of caution?
Well, the risk is you miss that it's actually secured. So when you say it's an abundance of caution and you imply that it's not secured by anything and somebody runs with that, and you forget to do the HMDA if you're a HMDA bank, the Reg Z, if those disclosures are applicable, and other things like that along the way. So be very careful talking abundance of caution with those in a compliance. They need to know that it's secured for the purposes of the alphabet regs, if you will.
Okay. We have always required a takeout letter or early disclosures for the permanent financing when preparing a construction perm loan. We do not replace the original construction loan. Rather, we change the terms with no new note for the permanent financing. If we do not receive a takeout letter and no early disclosures were prepared, is this a regulatory violation or simply a policy violation?
Again, there's lots going on there. I tried to make some notes. So I think at the very beginning, we talked about a takeout letter or disclosures. I assume because you're doing the construction financing and that those are necessary to know that some other bank's going to take you out. And therefore, that's why you're not doing disclosures for the second part of that, what is normally a two-phase financing. But then I kind of got lost the second half of that. It also sounds like when you don't have the takeout letter or don't do disclosures, which it doesn't sound like you do in the first place, that you just do a modification. While there's nothing that prevents you legally from doing that, the customer is missing out on being fully disclosed on what's going to happen after that construction phase. So while you can do it, it's not something that we would recommend from a consultation standpoint.
Okay, moving on to the Regulation B appraisal notice and copy. On construction loans, when the borrower plans to take the permanent financing to another lender, the lender doing the permanent financing will order the appraisal and transfer it to us. However, that lender doesn't always give the appraisal notice or have documentation that the appraisal was received. Do those requirements then fall on us?
Okay, so you're going to rely on the appraisal that somebody else is doing. You're doing the construction, somebody else is doing the permanent financing. Sounds like they're ordering the appraisal, which they can do, and there's appraisal rules that state how they can transfer that to you so you can utilize it. Okay, sounds like those things are being done. That's not a compliance thing, that's a safety and soundness thing. When you use an evaluation, whether you got it from somebody else or you do it internally or whatever, when you use it in connection with your transaction, you have to comply. Which means if you're going to rely on something that's not publicly available, which it sounds like it is in this case, you're going to provide the notice because it is or will be secured by a 1 to 4 family first lien, and you'll have to provide that notice within 3 days, and then you'll have to provide that free copy promptly upon completion, but no later than 3 days before closing. You're not going to be able to rely upon the third-party lender to do that on your behalf. You have to do it on behalf of your financial institution.
Okay, this one takes us back to HMDA. How do we determine HMDA coverage on a commercial loan to purchase property that includes a manufactured home that the borrower intends to demolish, as well as a separate non-residential building that is intended to be renovated and leased to a third party?
So did I hear purchase at the beginning of that, right? They're purchasing kind of all this. Is that
yes. Yeah.
Okay, so we're buying some property. It comes with commercial buildings. Maybe it's even multiple parcels, but on one of these properties is a manufactured home. Now, it could be that it's a mixed use property and we can determine that it's more not a dwelling than a dwelling for HMDA purposes. So you'll need to know the mixed use property rules and you have to classify that property. If it is a dwelling, let's say that dwelling's on a separate parcel that's included and there's no mixed use property discussion to be had, well, then you have a dwelling. It doesn't matter that they might tear it down or move it off the property after it's been purchased. If there's a dwelling there when it's purchased and you finance it, and then something's going to happen later, it's a dwelling when you purchase it. Hey, and again, unless we go back to the mixed use purpose and we can somehow classify it not being a dwelling and being something, other than that.
Okay, here's one on FACT Act red flags.
Okay.
If a credit report indicates an input address that is different than what is reported in the residence information within the report, would you consider this a red flag? And they note the input address is listed as in the other residences section.
Yeah, without seeing it absolute in front of me, black and white. I mean, it sure sounds to me like there's an address discrepancy. And everybody listening, your red flags program would have to include address discrepancies in there. There's a couple different sections of the Fair Credit Reporting Act that actually require that. There's the red flags, and then address discrepancies have their own separate section if you didn't know it. So I think it's absolutely covered, and you'd have to follow your red flag programs as far as how you document and resolve the discrepancy, the red flag, if you will, that was identified.
Okay, this one's on modifying a construction loan. We need to extend a construction only loan prior to maturity without changing any other terms, collecting the current interest payment and an extension fee. Can we also collect for any additional third-party site inspections that are needed as part of this unexpected extension if we disclose them on the modification agreement?
Yeah, I don't see anything in there based on what you provided that you can't do. I would hope that you're doing things consistently from one borrower to the next as far as adding on the fees and outlining them and so on and so forth. But yeah, it sounds like everything sounds like it's good to go on what was presented there.
Okay, moving to RESPA. On a single close construction to perm loan, would force placing builder's risk insurance during the construction phase be subject to the hazard insurance provisions in RESPA?
I don't think there's anything that excludes builder's risk. Now, you're not going to find it outright called out in the RESPA servicing requirements, but I do believe it's covered by the hazard insurance umbrella, if you will. So absent going and doing some deep research to find out if there's an exclusion, I think it needs to be included. And I've not ever heard of one.
Okay, this is back to HMDA coverage on a commercial non-owner occupied loan. How should institutions consistently apply the purpose standard, particularly in standards or in scenarios where the borrower's intent may be demolition or redevelopment? And they also specifically mentioned determining purpose on revolving or short-term credit products and partial collateral, looking to remain examiner ready.
All right. So HMDA is a two-part equation. You have to have a HMDA defined dwelling, and not all dwellings are HMDA defined dwellings. If you need more on mixed use property or what's a dwelling, you need to go check out our menu for HMDA. We've got a training session. It's HMDA Advanced, where we get into the weeds on that. We cover it in other sessions as well, but if you're not sure what you're looking for, reach out to us. But that's the first part of the equation. Do you have a HMDA defined dwelling? If we can check that box, we move on to the second part of the equation, which is HMDA purpose. And so kind of going back into your question, I know there's a lot of details there. Just because it's commercial purpose doesn't mean it's not a dwelling, and doesn't mean it's not a HMDA defined purpose. Okay, purchase, refinance, home improvement. I guess other would just be consumer, but you've got to start with, do I have collateral? Do I have a HMDA defined dwelling? If the answer is yes, okay, when that loan is made, and maybe the dwelling is going to be taken away later on, demolished, moved, whatever. When you make the loan, if you have a dwelling, it's a dwelling for HMDA, provided it's not otherwise excluded. Again, mixed use property, and there's other ways we can do it. Farms that are working farms and ranches, that sort of thing. If we check that box, then we go over to the purpose. If it's to purchase a dwelling, to refinance a dwelling, or to improve a dwelling, even if it's commercial purpose, and it's not about the majority purpose either. Keep that in mind. HMDA says if it's purchase, refinance, or improvement, and for $1, okay, then you will report that if it also met the HMDA dwelling criteria, that definition. So HMDA is unique that way. And if that's, again, an area that you need more training on, you're hungry for a bigger item on the menu, make sure you go check it out or reach out to us and we can get you hooked up with that.
Okay, moving to the SAFE Act. Does a manager of employees with MLO responsibilities need an NMLS ID if they do not typically perform MLO duties themselves?
Okay, so if they're just a manager, and they don't do MLO activities, so they don't meet all the MLO criteria, and there's a number for that, right? There's a de minimis number, then technically they wouldn't need to have an NMLS number. But let me go a little further. The SAFE Act also requires you to have a SAFE Act officer, and the SAFE Act officer cannot be an MLO, mortgage loan originator. Okay. Now there's also a de minimis level there, right? Like a but. So 10 or fewer employees, then your SAFE Act officer can be an MLO, but not if you have greater than 10 employees. And that burden of proof is going to be on you. So just a bunch of ifs, ands, and buts when it comes to the SAFE Act. It's not an intense training, but we do have a half-hour version of that available in our library as well.
Okay, this one's on TRID and the loan estimate. If an owner's title policy, which is optional, and the contract indicates it is a seller paid expense, are we still required to list this fee on the loan estimate?
So the loan estimate is about the borrower. Now, you've got to remember that when it comes to TRID, they have a special, unique calculation for how you're supposed to dole out the amounts for lenders and owners title insurance. You have to follow the TRID math first to figure out how you're going to disclose what the borrower is responsible for, assuming that that there's a discount. If there's no discounts involved with the simultaneous purchase of owners and lenders title insurance, then you could just get by with listing the lender's insurance, and the owner's insurance won't be disclosed on the loan estimate because it's only about the borrower, right? That's the purpose of the loan estimate. But if there's a simultaneous discount for the purchase of both at the same time, even though owners isn't required, and the seller is going to pay for the owners does impact what gets disclosed to the borrower on the loan estimate for the lender's title insurance. So you may not have to disclose the owners, but it will need to be accounted for if there's a discount in your calculation to disclose the lenders. Wow, that's complicated, but that's the answer to that question.
Okay, this next one is on escrows. Does RESPA provide for any de minimis exceptions when processing an escrow analysis?
Well, kind of. Just off the shooting from the hip here, right? So surpluses have a $50 de minimis when you do the analysis. If it's less than 50, if it's $50 or less, you can keep it and apply it toward the next year's computation year. When it comes to a shortage or even a deficiency, I mean, you can let those ride out. You don't have to tackle them right away. You can wait till the next computation year. And then when it comes to that shortage, you don't have to go all the way back up to the 2-month cushion if that's what you're trying. If you only want to have 1 month, that's fine as well. So there's not like outright de minimis, but there's different thresholds that you can choose to go up to or go down to depending on your risk tolerance.
Okay, back to HMDA coverage. On a construction loan secured by multiple parcels, one parcel includes a single family residence and the remaining parcels are used for business purposes. The loan proceeds will fund only the construction of non-residential improvements. How should institutions determine HMDA reportability?
So this one's a little different than what I heard earlier. This is multiple parcels, and we've got parcels that don't have anything to do with dwellings, but that's where the construction's happening. But we're also taking a hook in a different parcel that is a house. It'd be like me giving my house as collateral in connection with a loan for my business, and we're going to be doing construction for my business at the place of business. Well, when I give you my house as collateral, hey, that's a HMDA defined dwelling. Now we have to say, all right, what's the purpose of the loan proceeds? So long as they're not to purchase, refinance, or improve, we don't have a HMDA reportable transaction. So if I'm using it to do my new woodworking business, I'm taking my house as collateral plus where I do the woodworking, okay, to build a new woodworking building. That's not to purchase, refinance, or improve a dwelling. That's just business purpose home equity, not HMDA reportable. But if I'm going to take my equity in my house and I'm going to go buy rental homes, well, then that's secured by a HMDA defined dwelling for what? For purchasing a dwelling. Doesn't have to be secured by the building or by the dwelling being purchased. Just has to be HMDA defined dwelling that secures for the purposes of purchasing, refinancing, or improving a dwelling.
All right, moving to flood insurance. Do you believe the making of a loan is a permissible event that permits the lender to rely on a previous flood determination?
Yeah, so first off, we have a position paper on this. I know that off the top of my head, and maybe someone on our team can share a link for that in chat, or if not, you can go out to our free resources page and you can find that download there. Our interpretation has long been that the Meyer event, making, increase, renew, and extending, would allow you to reuse a prior determination. The wording in the Q&A, and I know there was a Federal Reserve Outlook live webinar, December, Diane, that they kind of danced around this and didn't quite do the Q&A justice and caused some confusion for some folks. Our interpretation hasn't changed. We do think that's allowed.
Okay, can we charge a fee to process a note or mortgage modification if the main purpose is to lower the rate? And would charging the fee mean we need to provide a new truth in lending disclosure?
So truth in lending, section 20, right, Diane? I think off the top of my head, has some information there. If you really are in for a real good night story, you can go tackle that. But let me give you the plain English here. You can do a lot of different things, most things, from a truth in lending standpoint, modification, without having to give new disclosures. There are a few things out there that will trigger new disclosures, but the example in this question, just lowering the rate, you can do that by way of a modification and not have to provide new disclosures. Again, there are some deep, dark places of truth in lending most people don't go to read. Reach out to us. We'll help you out with that if you think you've got one of those that you're staring at.
Okay, this person is using the alternative without a seller TRID forms.
Okay.
Where should we show funds held for future advances on a rehab or remodel loan? And they say they've sometimes shown it in the payoffs and payments table and sometimes shown it as going to the borrower as part of the cash to close.
Okay, so they're absolutely right. The payoff and payments table is where those are going to go, and the TRID regulation itself doesn't quite go there as black and white as we'd like it to. Although this is something we cover in our 2-hour TRID for construction loans webinar that we do every year. It's it's not even a 200, it's like a 400 level class for TRID. So if you're really looking for some in the weeds TRID, check that out. But the payoff and payments table is where that would go. We would label it something like construction holdbacks or home improvement holdbacks, whatever it is that you're holding back so they don't walk around town with it and spend it on something else while the construction's going on. And then they're supposed to go to pay for it and they've spent it and it's not available. So we'd put that in the payoff and payments table.
Okay, this one's on HMDA purpose. We have a consumer loan secured by a dwelling to get cash out for home improvements to a different dwelling that does not secure the loan. What would the correct purpose for HMDA reporting be? Specifically, does it matter that the improvements are being made to a property that does not secure the loan?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned this with the purchase example I gave earlier, but I'll combine them both here. When it comes to HMDA, again, two-part equation. Do you have a HMDA defined dwelling, and then do you have a HMDA defined purpose? So when it comes to the first part, the collateral, let's just check that box. We've got a HMDA defined dwelling that's securing our loan, so we've got the collateral side of it. When it comes to purchase and home improvement, okay, it does not have to be the purpose of the loan to purchase the dwelling that secures the loan. It also doesn't have to be to improve the dwelling that secures the loan. It's just got to be dwelling secured for the purpose of improving any dwelling or for purchasing any dwelling. So it doesn't have to be the one that secures the loan.
Okay, we have a construction loan coming due, but we don't want a brand new mortgage that would be behind other liens. Is there a compliance reason that we can't just modify the existing mortgage?
So yeah, that's a legal thing, not a compliance thing. And so from a compliance standpoint, you're going to be fine, but you'll need to go check out what the legal side of that is, which is not something that we do.
Okay, this next one. At what point in a loan process can a compliance mistake no longer be fixed?
Well, that's a loaded question, right? It's going to depend on the mistake or what may not be a mistake. So let me do this. Intent to apply. So intent to apply for joint credit under Regulation B has to be done at the time of application. So if you didn't get that done at the time of application and we're now 3 days in, that ship sailed. The toothpaste is not going back in the tube and we don't have DeLoreans. We can't go back in time. That's not going to happen. So you can't fix that. But if we're talking about a loan where you haven't made it to closing yet and you haven't yet pulled a flood determination, maybe your procedures say you're supposed to do that, on the first day after the application, but you're still a ways out from closing. Well, then pull the flood determination so you can, make sure you've identified whether or not the collateral is in a 100-year floodplain. So it depends on the mistake, your policies, your procedures, the regulatory requirements. There are some things that just can't be fixed. You can't, once you've gone past the line, there's no going back.
Okay, funny you mentioned joint intent because that's where this next question takes us.
Okay.
If a client checks they are applying for joint credit, does that cover Regulation B or is a separate form required?
This little thing gets talked about so much. We've had so many questions over the years on this that we actually have a 2-hour program that's all about applicants and applications. And I want to say this segment's probably about 30, 45 minutes in and of itself. But back to the question at hand. Intent to apply. You've got flexibility. It might be signatures on an application at the time of application. It might be him checking some boxes on a paper document or electronic document. Could be a separate piece of paper. There's lots of different ways you can get this done. The lender is required to maintain documentation, and it has to be done at the time of application. Outside of that, you really have the flexibility to do what you need to do to get that done. Just make sure it gets done at the time of application.
Back to HMDA coverage. We have a loan to purchase a home that will be paid off shortly after another home is sold. Is this considered a bridge loan and not reportable, or is it reportable regardless of the length of time the note is on our books because there will not be any further financing?
So the thing that I heard throughout that whole question was the term bridge. And there's a lot of misunderstandings out there about and misuse of the term bridge. So when you say bridge loan, most people, what they want to go is, oh, it's a bridge loan, it's exempt from HMDA. Well, in the old HMDA rules, but that everybody is supposed to have flushed and forgotten long ago, bridge loans used to be exempt kind of all by themselves. It's been a long time since that was a requirement. And so bridge loans, what we have to look at is it bridge only, meaning we're going to make you a loan to bridge this gap, usually to sell a home, okay? And so we need financing until the home sells, and then after it sells, that will pay the loan off and there'll be nothing left. That's bridge only. Those are all reportable provided they meet the collateral and purpose test: purchase, refinance, improvement, or consumer home equity, other. If it's bridge followed by something else, Diane, you need bridge financing. Here's some money. We're going to get this thing sold. And then you're going to have to roll that into a new loan because whatever you're bridging isn't going to be enough to totally pay it off. Then it's bridge followed by something else. The bridge is exempt because you're going to report what follows: temporary followed by permanent financing. So bridge only, reportable. Bridge followed by something else, that's temporary followed by permanent, only report the permanent financing. Bridge doesn't tell me anything. I need some more details in order to get you the right answer.
Okay, this next one takes us to TRID and changed circumstances. We
it.
have a refinance from another bank with all closing costs being financed. The customer now wants to decrease the loan amount, lowering zero tolerance fees, such as our origination fee. Since the closing disclosure has not been completed, do we need to do a change of circumstance and do another loan estimate?
Okay, so change circumstances are probably the number one discussion when it comes to TRID. Again, we've got a 2-hour program just on that if you're hungry for more. The question itself, when we've got a change, we've got new information. So we've disclosed based on a certain dollar amount. Let's say it was $200,000. And now we're getting ready to move to the closing disclosure. And somewhere in there, the borrower's like, you know what? I don't need quite that much money. We're going to lower the loan amount. Maybe we've come into some inheritance, went and run the lottery, or I don't know, somehow came into some funds, and we don't need as much. Well, the reason to redisclose and reset tolerances is because the fees are going up relative to information you've obtained. And that's when you would want to consider redisclosing and resetting those tolerances. When the fees are going down, there's no requirement to redisclose. And so if you've issued a loan estimate based on a loan amount request that's up here, and now it's lowering, and that's going to affect fees, you can ride that out until you get to the closing disclosure and then give them what you believe the actual final fees are going to be based on the lowered loan amount. You don't need to redisclose a loan estimate. Now, do the TRID rules allow for it? You could do an information-only loan estimate. I wouldn't recommend it because they don't count, but they do count against you if you don't do them right. So if it's something I don't have to do, but I could get in trouble for doing it, I'm going to run as hard and as fast the other way as I can. That's my take on it.
Okay, when conducting a fair lending analysis, do you typically see institutions breaking down denials and withdrawals into all the categories that HMDA uses, or is it simply denials and withdrawals?
So I believe what they're getting at is, and if you've ever been to one of our HMDA programs, you've likely heard Dave talk about this, but HMDA puts a magnifying glass or a microscope on the action taken, if you will. They split some hairs where just if you're not a HMDA bank, it's denied, withdrawn, incomplete, right? It's those buckets. HMDA says, you know what? When it comes to withdrawn, we want we want withdrawn, but sometimes we have withdrawns that are fully approved. And so we're going to call those approved, not accepted, right? And so from a fair lending standpoint, when you look at HMDA data, you should look at, or HMDA loans, you should look at the action taken related to those HMDA loans and take that into consideration from a fair lending standpoint, no question. But when you're looking at non-HMDA transactions, I don't think you need to bring that magnifying glass, that microscope into consideration. Look at denied, withdrawn, incomplete, but I wouldn't go so far as to get into approved, not accepted the way HMDA does. You could, but I don't see people doing that actively.
Okay, this next one is on modifications. Do you see any issues with charging a fee based on a percentage of the loan balance when the customer requests a rate reduction?
Just be consistent to avoid issues with fair lending. So as long as you're consistent and have a method to your madness and everybody's following the same roadmap, I think you're good to go.
Okay, back to appraisal delivery requirements. What are the minimum requirements needed to demonstrate compliance with Regulation B's timing for the delivery of an appraisal prior to closing?
You have to demonstrate a process. There's no signature requirements, there's a disclosure that goes out that says we may order an appraisal. If we will, we'll give you a free copy. But even that doesn't have to be signed. You have to demonstrate a process. When it comes to delivering the actual free copy of the appraisal, again, demonstrate a process. Now, I know some investors have forms and signature requirements, but the regulation doesn't require that. You just have to demonstrate your process on how you do that. That also means that when loan officers and processors go get interviewed, what they're singing needs to match up with the sheet music in your policy and procedures.
Okay, how about HMDA reportability if someone purchases a home to be used primarily as a VRBO with the potential for the owner to stay in it as well? Would this be mostly transitory and not reportable, or because the owners might vacation there, reportable as a second or vacation home?
I tell you what, I personally want this problem, but let's talk about it in relationship to the question, right? So I tell you what, 2 or 3 times just this week, this has come up in a training, quick response calls that we've taken in. And so VRBOs and Airbnbs. So, and I believe we've just written something on this. I think is it going to be in our magazine, Diane, this next month?
I believe it was in January.
It was in January. Okay. So our take on, so HMDA doesn't go here, right? HMDA says if it's a HMDA defined dwelling, okay, it satisfies the collateral test. And you and I and everybody listening, when we look at most of these VRBOs and Airbnbs, we're going to go, duh, that's a dwelling, right? Okay. Pretty darn nice one if we're talking about Florida or the coast or something like that, or a lake. So they look, walk, and talk like they should be dwellings. But HMDA also says if it's transitory, like hotels, motels, and dormitories, then it's not a dwelling. So I've been in several Airbnbs and VRBOs, and they rent them out like hotels, motels. If that's strictly what it is, and that's how it's being used, then we're going to put them into the bucket that it's, even though it looks, walks, and talks like a dwelling, for HMDA purposes, it's transitory. Now, where can we look to draw some lines? Again, HMDA doesn't give us anything. We're actually going to go to our friend Truth in Lending. And in Truth in Lending, I don't know this off the top of my head, but it's because I read our article, but there's a 14-day thing, right, Diane? And I think that's maybe borrowed for some tax laws or something like that. But anyway, if it's my VRBO, my Airbnb, and I'm using it 2 weeks out of the year, we're going to say then that's going to be a second home. That's our logic. So if they're going to use it 2 weeks or more out of the year, then we're going to go second home. If it's truly rented out the whole time, like a hotel, motel, then we're going to go, it's transitory and not a dwelling for HMDA. So there are some people that, yeah, they're going to use it 2 weeks a year, but there's others that, there's one time my family went on vacation and there was a management that was doing a dozen of these things, and nobody's coming there that owns it and staying 2 weeks out of the year. It's an ownership group or an investment company. And so those are all transitory in my opinion. Whereas you will have some where, it's Diane's second home. She's going to stay there for 2 weeks because she's doing compliance the other, whatever week, 50 weeks out of the year. And so she can't be there the whole time. You have to classify the property and then put it in the bucket.
Okay, back to flood insurance. Are you seeing institutions criticized for how they go about determining insurable value, specifically when it comes to flood insurance purposes, or do you feel the risk is low as long as it's well documented?
Well, I think that last part's entirely true. The Q&A, the guidance that's out there says that, there's no black and white definitive, it's this. There's lots of ways to get there, so long as it can be supported. So as long as you document a story and it's not something way completely out there, you should be good to go. Now, the first part of the question is, do we see people getting written up for this? You bet. It's subjective, no question. If your story leaves it to the imagination of the next person that picks up that loan file and it can't be followed, that next person is likely someone like Diane or I, or even, even more, maybe an examiner that they're not wired like you. And so they're going to imagine it differently. And, that's probably not going to go so well. So make sure it can be supported. And a lot of times if it aligns itself closely with the hazard insurance policy, that's probably the number one alignment that we see. And that's not an apple to apple comparison, but if it's closely aligned with those dollar amounts and thresholds, it's probably good to go.
Okay. Do you know anything about 1071, Jared? Can you give an update on where we stand there and where you see it going?
Well, first off, we've got a whole group we've dedicated to this since March of 23. And, it's been as high as 120 some financial institutions. I think we're sitting right about 60 now. First off, where are we at? We're waiting for the final version of the re-proposal, which really didn't change a whole lot. But for some of you, the small changes in there were big ones when it comes to the threshold. So where we're sitting currently is we're waiting for the final version. I thought it would have been out before the end of the year. I mean, they were telling us all they were closing the CFPB. They had just a few weeks left and this was going to go out the door. They were talking interim final rules because we follow the things you don't want to follow that are the court case updates that they come at the first of every month. And we're out there scouring the internet for them. And they said these interim final rules are coming and that's so they can avoid the comment period. Well, the longer this goes, the more they have to look into the comments. So I'm not sure where they're at with that, but we should likely see something very soon. I don't look for the final version of the re-proposal to look too much differently than what was re-proposed back in, I guess it was November that was proposed. The big thing there was the threshold. And I knew this was going to come up today, so I want to make sure I didn't get it wrong. So the threshold is, let's see, it was 100 last 2 years. Now it's 1,000 covered originations. They also moved the small business threshold from $1 million to $5 million. I'm not sure that's going to help a ton of people out, but that 1,000 origination volume threshold is likely to be huge. There are a lot of financial institutions that are out based upon that. Now, there's a lot of you that are lucky. You still get to stay in and play. And so for you, what are we looking at? We're looking at a 2027 collection year with a 2028 reporting year. It'll be June of 28 as long as everything stays as it was originally put out there. So there's a lot of things that they couldn't touch. Keep that in mind because they're in the law and that would take an act of Congress. So what they were allowed to change was just the things that the previous leadership at the CFPB took the liberty to add or to create when they put out the final rule the first time. There just wasn't a lot that they could do.
Under Regulation B and the Fair Credit Reporting Act, can you discuss when a guarantor is an applicant, such as for joint intent and adverse action notice requirements?
Well, speaking of this, first off, January version of our monthly connection. We covered this. Dave actually covered it in our memory lane. That's one of the things where we take trips down memory lane and rehash old requirements. Somebody brought this and wanted an explanation. So I'll give you a short one here too, but make sure you check that product out if you haven't. So for adverse action, when it comes to guarantors, and I'll throw guarantors and cosigners both out there, guarantors and cosigners under Reg B and the Fair Credit Reporting Act, they don't experience adverse action because they're not applicants. Now, can you send them adverse action notices? You bet you can. That's fine. When it comes to guarantors in another section of Regulation B and cosigners, like intent to apply, sometimes they're applicants. Isn't that fun, right? That's not complicated at all. If they apply, I'm going to use a word that we don't normally use because it's not plain English, but I'm going to borrow it from the regulation. They use this word contemporaneously. It means Diane and I walk into the bank arm in arm at the same time and apply together. If she's a cosigner for me, she'd probably never do that, but let's pretend she would. If we come in arm in arm together, okay, and she's gonna be my cosigner, that means at the same time, then technically you need to get intent to apply. If it's a required guarantor or cosigner, now keep in mind, you cannot name the party. What you can say is, hey, Jared, you don't qualify on your own, but if you went and got a qualified co-borrower, cosigner, guarantor, and you didn't name them, that'd be a scenario where it's a required version of that party. Then technically the intent to apply requirements don't apply in that scenario. So they're applicants for that part of the regulation most of the time, unless they're required. then they technically don't need the intent to apply. Can you overkill this and just get it across the board? Absolutely. Can you overkill the adverse action? Absolutely. And if you want more, again, on our menu, we've got adverse action notices, we got applicants and applications, we've got a much larger version if that's what you're looking for from a training content standpoint.
Okay, we have not talked about this rate set date yet. Can we have a general procedure that the date disclosures, such as the loan estimate, go out is the date the rate is set?
So let's just give a little more here, right, Diane? So the date the rate is set, what do we use that for? Truth in Lending Act, the ability to pay requirements, right? We use it for, does qualified mortgages go there too? I think it does for its thresholds. Well, HMDA, it uses it. So we've got this requirement that it infringes on several different regulatory requirements, even different regulations, HMDA and Reg Z. So it's a small thing, but a pretty big deal, because if you get it wrong, it actually has this domino effect where you can screw several things up. So I think the question was, can we always use the loan estimate date? You can try, but in the event that the loan estimate date is not the date, okay, that the rate was set the final time before closing, then that's not going to work out for you. So I have a lot of banks that want to make it black and white. You can try, but when it's truly not in that scenario, the date the rate was set the final time before closing, and you go and use the loan estimate date anyway, and it came after or it came before that, you're going to have problems when it comes to that calculation for those rate spreads. And that's going to affect HMDA data, Truth in Lending Act qualified mortgages, and the Truth in Lending Act ability to repay requirements. All of those things are going to be, well, and the high cost mortgage requirements. There's another one. So lots of different things that are tied to that. And if you get it wrong, it can have lots of implications.
I was going to say the answer you can try doesn't exude confidence from a compliance perspective, but this one moves to escrow account being established on a commercial loan. And they're wondering if they need to provide any disclosures, either initially or over the life of the loan.
Yeah, so the RESPA escrow requirements don't apply to commercial loans. So there's some good news. Don't have to worry about it in that scenario.
Back to Regulation B. Can you discuss the impact of what essentially seems to be the removal of disparate impact risks?
Well, despite what you've heard, it is not completely gone and to be forgotten. Yep, they're wiping it away from your next examination. They're wiping it out, or it's proposed. They're going to wipe it out of the Fair Housing Regulation. They're going to wipe it. The current administration. They're going to wipe it out of the Regulation B. Now, where's it not being removed from? Where will it still reside? The Fair Housing Act law, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act law, and the years and years of case law out there where we have decisions at all different court levels, all the way up to the Supreme Court. So the risk is not with your next examination. You're not going to hear about disparate impact, the effects test, but there still remains risk to your organization. First off, there's risk that you can get sued from a civil liability standpoint. Okay, somebody can bring a lawsuit against you based on the disparate impact theory. Now, there's a whole road to go down for that to actually come to fruition, actually be a thing that impacts naturally. But the press that would go along with that is reputation. I know you're not supposed to talk about reputation risk either, but trust me, your reputation still matters to you, and you need to pay attention. Your regulators aren't going to bring it. Okay, but you need to pay attention to it. So back to this disparate impact thing. You're not going to hear it come up in your next examination. Okay, but civil liability. Let me go to the next thing. The current administration has 3 years left, just shy of 3 years. And so we could keep the same party in place for another 4 years. That could happen, and things likely stay status quo based on what they are today. But if we have a party change in 3 years, there's going to be a pendulum swing back the other way, just like it swung where it is today. Okay, it swings back the other way, and somebody goes and adds back to the regulation, disparate impact, adds back to the Fair Housing Act regulation, disparate impact, because those laws do support that. So we're in a unique time, right, where the pendulum has swung the other way, and you're not going to hear about it from your regulators, but it still presents a risk. The other thing to remember is the statute of limitations. I want to say off the top of my head, 5 years for most things fair lending is the look back period. So things you do today could get you, or things you ignore today could get you in trouble 5 years down the road because of that look back. The other thing about the disparate impact and effects test is oftentimes these are like tip of the iceberg moments. Don't ignore the tip of the iceberg. You've all seen the movie Titanic. It's going to be a problem if it's a large iceberg that hits you or that you hit. Okay, so make sure you still pay attention and investigate those things that make an appearance And, big deal or little deal, you need to do your risk analysis on them.
Okay, back to TRID. And in this case,
Mhm.
the applicant is requesting an increase to the loan amount. And they're wondering, do we withdraw the initial request and start over? If we do not need to start over, can we just issue the closing disclosure with the increased loan amount, or do we need to issue a loan estimate?
Okay, so lots going on there. I would not start over. That would be a waste of your time, I think. So don't start over. What you have is new information. This would be a loan amount increase. It's a change circumstance. So as long as you do something with the information within 3 days, like issuing a new disclosure with updated terms and conditions, you can reset those tolerance baselines. So issuing a loan estimate would be option number one. Now, if you're close enough to closing where you, in lieu of issuing a loan estimate, you're ready just to issue the closing disclosure, you could use your closing disclosure as your vehicle to handle the change circumstance, as opposed to issuing a loan estimate followed by a closing disclosure. That's an option for you. If you're far enough away from closing, then just issue the loan estimate. But if it's like, hey, I was ready to issue the closing disclosure, why don't we just do that with updated numbers? As long as it's within 3 days of the change circumstance information, you're going to be good to go.
Okay, back to flood and determining a
Okay.
value. If an appraisal comes back with no market value assigned to a structure, what further steps can we or do we need to take to assign value for flood insurance purposes?
Well, you can't ever, okay, I'm going to repeat, you can't ever rely on market value or the lack of a market value by an appraisal, because that's not part of the equation. Insurable value is replacement cost less depreciation at the time of the loss. Um, I guess that's one way to look at insurable value. Sometimes it's so. Let me back up. Replacement cost might be your insurable value if it's my or your house and I live there 80% of the time. If it's not a principal residence, somebody living there 80% of the time, it's going to be a moving target. It's going to be replacement less depreciation at the time of the loss. Moving target. You have to determine what the insurable value is. Kind of going back to that question that was asked earlier, there's lots of ways to get there. Okay, you've got flexibility, but as long as it can be supported, that's the big part.
Back to Regulation B, can more than one notice of incompleteness ever be provided on an application?
Yeah, in fact, it may be necessary. So the requirement is, if you are missing things that the applicant needs to provide within 30 or by day 30 after the application. So I apply today and you say I need something, I need to provide you something. If I don't get it to you by day 30, you have to send me a written notice saying what's missing, or you deny it because it's incomplete. You have to do that. There's a written notice that goes out by day 30. After the day 30 marker, when you provide that written notice to me, you can give me whatever you think is a reasonable time to get to you whatever is missing. That's up to you. One of the misconceptions is it's got to be 30 days once you provide that notice for me to provide you what's missing. It's whatever you think's reasonable. You get to say how long it stays in your pipeline. That's up to you. 30, 60, 90, 120 days. You come up with that and then just be consistent. But it could be that after let's say I provided everything to you by day 30, you didn't send me a notice. Okay, and maybe this is more of a commercial loan scenario, but let's say we're on like day 58 and all of a sudden you learn of something new relative to the request, and now you want something more from me. We're probably going to have a verbal discussion and you're probably fine. But if I don't get it to you within 30 days after that, you could have to send me another notification. So it could be absolutely necessary that you send a second one after you've crossed that first time frame and something new presents itself that the borrower needs to get to you that you didn't know of or were not aware of previously.
How about, can you address the need to provide a revised loan estimate to the applicant if we are ordering an inspection, but it will be a lender paid, lender absorbed cost?
So absorbed costs do not need to be disclosed on the loan estimate. Now, I would be consistent. They will need to be provided on the closing disclosure. And a lot of banks miss out on that. So things that the lender absorbs wouldn't be on the loan estimate typically. So like, let's say you don't charge for flood determinations. You don't charge for credit report fees. And I don't remember what the example was in this scenario, but whatever that was, you don't charge for that. Fine. Can be left off the loan estimate, but on the closing disclosure, it'll have to go in the paid by others column with respect to the correct, A, B, C area on that disclosure.
This one takes us back to HMDA reporting. If a lender on a commercial loan has been assigned an NMLS number, do we report it?
I don't believe there's any exclusion in HMDA that says because they're a commercial lender, you don't have to report the NMLS number. I get it's a commercial transaction, and the SAFE Act does not require them to provide the NMLS number in connection with that transaction on the application or any of the documents. But from a HMDA standpoint, that data point's required, and if it exists, even though it's a commercial loan, I think you have to report it. I don't know of any exclusion.
This one takes us back to the Regulation B appraisal notice. Can we give that notice to all applicants if the loan will be secured by a dwelling? And if so, must we give a copy of the appraisal?
So you can overkill the notice. In fact, we recommend if you make HPMLs from time to time that you do so, because while Reg B only requires on a 1 to 4 family first lien, if it's an HPML, it's all liens. So we recommend that if you make HPMLs from time to time. Do you have to actually give them a free copy of the disclosure in a scenario where you gave them the notice and it wasn't required? Not technically. You could have a customer service, awkward moment on your hands, but there's no requirement that you do that. In fact, we've seen some clients adjust that wording a little bit to say only if it's a first lien will they give them a free copy of that appraisal. So no regulatory requirement. I don't believe there's any UDAP there or anything like that. It's just you said something a little different than maybe what is actually going to happen.
Okay, this one comes back to use of the credit score and the requirements under the FACT Act. What is your take on including the credit score on adverse action notices when we don't necessarily rely on the score itself? Should we always include it, or just when there is negative information in the credit report, or never include it as our procedures do not specify a credit score minimum?
Yeah, so this is a dangerous one, and there's a lot of wording in that question that if we were having a consultation, I'd start to pick apart and say, all right, let's talk about this, let's break that down, because it talks about using the credit score, and what you have to understand is what the Fair Credit Reporting Act says about use of the credit score. It says in whole or in part. So the fact that they don't have a credit score threshold that they outline, that's fine. But why do you pull credit reports with scores? Because you're using them in whole or more likely in part in connection with that transaction. And so it's really hard to argue that you didn't use it in some way, shape, or fashion. I mean, the fact that you saw it, it means you probably used it. You may not have a cutoff. It may not be directly, but again, in whole or in part. So I'd recommend if you're ordering credit reports with scores that you're providing that score in those adverse action situations. Now, where wouldn't I? If you're strictly going to deny it because of collateral and it has nothing to do with the credit report whatsoever, loan to value, hey, then I think there's an argument to be made there. There are scenarios, I don't want to say it's black and white, always do it, but most situations say you used it in some way, shape, or form. Again, in whole or in part, it's a lot easier to include it and not have to try to defend why you didn't than it is to exclude it and try to defend yourself.
We often have loan files where a credit report is obtained before the lender indicates they have an application. In some cases, there is even evidence an appraisal has been ordered. Can you address if or when this is acceptable, or if we need to change our practice?
So I don't want to say like, no, you can never do that. But what we're going to, if this was my bank and I'm king of compliance in your bank, we're going to have a little meeting, and I'm going to find out where this is going on. And maybe it's across the board, but we're going to have a little meeting that says, okay, what are we really doing here? Especially if this is commercial. And I think that's what you alluded to, right? That, we've ordered these things, are we trying to not call something an application when it really is to just not have to do things so early? And maybe this is not commercial. Maybe it's in the mortgage area. We don't have to give disclosures any earlier than we have to. And so if you're ordering things and, credit reports, services, yet you don't have an application yet, we need to talk about our process, because it's probably more likely you do have an application and just trying not to have one, or maybe just don't understand. I don't want to say it's absolute though, because I've seen scenarios where you're having where you do an inquiry with a borrower, and somehow we've ordered a credit report. Credit reports don't automatically equate to applications. Appraisals, the order them, not necessarily an absolute, but high correlation, both those things. And it may be an indicator that something's broken in our process or our understanding of how the process should go.
How about TRID applications? If someone gives us a property address but still has multiple different properties in mind, do we have a TRID application where we need to issue a loan estimate?
Well, this is all going to depend on how the conversation, how the information was presented to you. So if Diane's the applicant and she's like, you know what, we've been, she's already been talking to me. Let's say we were having an ongoing conversation, and she's like, well, we've got 5 that we're looking at. I don't know which one. We haven't figured it out yet. And maybe she's laid all 5 of them down on the table. Well, you don't have a property address because there's 5 of them. If she says, well, this is the one we're interested in, but we've got these other ones, but what's this one look like? Well, then you have the property address. There's a million different ways we could have this conversation take shape, right? And so if they truly haven't identified one, then no, you don't have one. If they've got 7, well, then you don't have one. Okay? If they've got 1, you've got, the purchase agreement isn't something you can require at this point. So it's never necessarily an absolute. Remember, it's a shopping disclosure. Very little required on behalf of the borrower before quite a bit's required on you to produce a loan estimate that meets that good faith standard within 3 days.
This next one's on the flood notice. Are you still hearing of institutions being criticized for not giving the notice at least 10 calendar days before closing, even on a modification?
I mean, yes, the answer is yes. Has it maybe fallen back a bit? Probably, because most people are doing it, right? Most people are complying. I would say the Fed is still holding their lenders to that level. I had heard the FDIC was there. I'm not sure if they're there anymore. I haven't heard from the other regulators. My recommendation to you all is follow the 10-day recommendation. And that way you don't have to have an uncomfortable discussion with your regulator. Don't follow that and you're taking some risks.
Okay, this one is on 1071 again. For those who may be celebrating, they will not be covered by the 1071 rule. What type of documentation do you feel auditors and examiners will be looking for to demonstrate the requirements do not apply?
Yeah, so let's assume that threshold gets finalized at 1,000. I don't know for sure if it will, but I assume it will be 1,000 that they finalize that out. So if you're like, yeah, if we counted every commercial loan on our books, we wouldn't sniff 1,000. Maybe it's just print. Here's the loan volume for the last year, or it's just a compilation of it from your system, and it's like 500 or 600 or 400 or 200. Done. We're not even going to go any further than that. If you can see the threshold from your origination standpoint, and you're close, there's going to be more burden of proof on you to demonstrate the exercise you went through to say we're out or we're in. But if you can't see the threshold, if you're so far away, like, yep, not even looking at it, you're not going to have to do much. The closer you are, the more burden there will be to demonstrate that you went through the exercise to check that this is where we're at for our covered credit transactions that we've originated relative to the threshold. Either we're under it or it pushed us over the edge.
This one takes us back to the Regulation B appraisal notice and copy. Do those requirements apply if we know we will rely on an existing valuation? What if we update it in some manner? Is the notice then triggered as well as a copy?
So if you're relying on a previous evaluation, appraisal, whatever it is, something that's not publicly available, then you don't trigger the notice or the free copy. But it means this is what I already have. I'm taking it and using it again. And you have to follow the safety and soundness rules as well. I'm just talking about Reg B here, but if you're going to use it as it was originally published, you're good. You don't have to give them anything. But if you take what was previously utilized, and because safety and soundness says you've got to do some manipulation to it, go grab a new comp to justify it. Well, now you have something that's not the same as what you used before, and then it would trigger the notice and free copy requirements. So that's the answer to the question, I guess.
This one takes us back to HMDA. Recently, I had a loan officer indicate that the sex, ethnicity, and race were not visually collected in a face-to-face interview because the officer did not want to do so. Is this acceptable?
No, yeah, you can't ignore that requirement. That's not okay.
Moving to TRID. Generally, when are lenders required to disclose prepaid items such as homeowners insurance and property taxes on the loan estimate and closing disclosure?
Yeah, so those prepaids, we get this question quite often. And I want to, when we do this in the webinar, I've got a slide and it's like this window, right? So it's if the prepaids are due and payable between the application date and the first payment due date, and you're going to require them to be paid at or before closing, then you need to disclose them. But let's say, for instance, that the borrower prepaid their entire year of taxes or their entire year of hazard insurance, and therefore it won't be due and payable within this window, application date to first payment due date. Then you wouldn't disclose it. The only exception to that is if it was past due before the window opened, then you can include it within that time frame. Tell you what, Diane, that hour has flown by. We're a minute out here. I'm going to share my screen. Hold on before you go here. I've got a couple closing announcements here before we do close out today. I'm going to share my screen. Give me just a moment here. Diane, thank you for co-hosting today and promoting those products and services along the way. Much appreciate that. You did a great job. I do want to remind everyone, we've got another one of these that is right around the corner. April 28th. We'll be doing the second installment of the year. That is our deposit compliance Q&A forum. You can already register for that. So leave today, go register, save your seat. We hit almost 1,000 live registrants to live people in the room here today. That's awesome. I think that might be a record for one of these. So love all of you that dropped by for a little lending compliance Q&A here today. As we close out the program, first off, thank you all for taking time again to stop by today. I want to thank my team. It takes a lot to put this on with all the people coming in here today. Great job, team. There's a short survey that likely popped up in a separate browser window, 5 short questions. It'll take you less than a minute to give us a little feedback here today. We'd love it if you do that. And probably the biggest thing you've all been waiting for, the recording. It was rapid fire Q&A today, right? And so there's likely some questions out there you want to go back and listen to again. We're going to let you do that. There's no extra additional charge for this. We're providing this just like the rest of the program. It's free. There'll be an email notification where you can go and download that recording for this forum during the next 2 weeks. Now we leave it out there for the next year till the next time that we do this. With that, again, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank our team here for making this thing go today. Right now, what we're going to do is let you get back to what you all do so well, and that's serving your customers. We'll see you all again soon.